Hi Wyn, thanks for joining us today. So we're going to be talking about conveyancing. I think a great place to start would be if somebody's in the situation of potentially buying a property for the first time, where does sort of legal representation and legal advice come into that process?
Most of the time, purchase of a property is agreed through an estate agent.
Okay.
Inevitably, the estate agent will have a link with a local solicitor or a firm of solicitors, so they could guide you in the direction of a solicitor. If you do need a mortgage advisor should know a good solicitor who they use all the time. They could also provide guidance as to who to instruct. And I think it's really important for people to speak to friends and family, people who've moved previously, because they will have a recommendation for somebody that they have used previously. And I think that's a really good way of getting somebody based on recommendations through friends and family.
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. It's you know, a source of information that's probably quite trusted, isn't it? To say, well, try this firm or this person. So in terms of, I suppose, a typical conveyancing journey, if there is one, where does the legal representation start, if you like? At what point would you, for example, get involved during a purchase of a house?
We would normally start the instruction, if you like, for example, if it was a first-time buyer who went into an estate agent, agreed to purchase a property, we would either get contact directly, potentially from the client. They could come to us direct.
Okay.
The estate agent could say, please, can you contact these clients to provide them with a quotation? It could be the mortgage broker. It could be friends and family. So once you've agreed to purchase a property, I would say that is the time basically to instruct your solicitor or conveyancer. In respect of a sale, traditionally, the seller, solicitor or conveyancer is not instructed until the property has actually sold. But if you were selling a property, there is nothing stopping an individual from instructing the solicitor once the property is actually on the market.
Oh, okay, right.
And I think that
and start
would be
that as soon as possible.
As soon as possible, because I think that would be a game changer for the industry itself. Because now somebody will put the property on the market. They won't instruct a solicitor straight away. If they instruct their solicitor or conveyancer when the property is on the market, everything could be checked beforehand. Identification could be dealt with, various forms completed, so that once the property is actually sold, it's all done, and we're actually reducing the timescale it takes for a transaction to go through, which I know is a gripe of a lot of people, how long conveyancing actually takes. So if there could be a change in mindset within the industry that sellers do instruct us at an earlier stage, I think on average there is a stat out there somewhere which says it takes 24 days from when a file is opened and documents sent to a client for the client to return the documents so that contracts can be issued. So if as an industry, if you like, we're all shaving 24 days off a transaction, I think there would be a lot less gripes with how the process works.
So that's a good first tip in terms of when you're first starting to talk to a solicitor or whoever's helping you with the purchase. Those kinds of things are good to start having conversations about as early as possible.
Definitely in respect of a sale. In respect of a purchase, slightly trickier because the purchase solicitor wouldn't have necessarily seen anything as yet. But obviously, if we could get the seller solicitor to do what I actually suggested,
of course,
then there is potentially, it'd be very much similar to an auction scenario, where you could actually instruct your solicitor on the purchase far earlier. They could actually check documents before you actually even put an offer in.
And be doing all that, from the outset, so it's not lingering as something that you have to do further down the line. And as you say, that potentially eats into the overall process, doesn't it?
And just satisfying identification requirements, because I know that's a bugbear with the industry, if you like. You could agree to purchase a property. You'd have to show your identification to the estate agent. You then have to show your identification to the mortgage advisor, and then you get a letter from the solicitor asking for identification again.
So same ID, but has to be provided.
Has to be provided separately to 3 different parties, and I know there are moves afoot to look at that so that there is one common central place, so that everybody could, if you like, log in and make sure that that person's identification is valid.
So another thing for people to be aware of there in terms of documentation, having everything ready perhaps before they start thinking about buying or selling. Make sure you've got ID for sure, and that you've got those those documents in place.
And another one that does cause a lot of friction sometimes, and unfortunately it's something that we have to do, is evidence of where the funds are coming from to purchase the property. Solicitor or conveyancer will always ask, where are the funds from? So you would have thought that most of the time you have to get that information in place to apply for a mortgage anyway.
Sure.
So if you can actually provide that to the solicitor at the outset, and I would say be honest with your solicitor or conveyancer. If you are getting a gift from friends or family, make it be known at the start of the process.
Okay.
Because then we know what we would need to do for a potential lender if there is a mortgage company involved.
Okay, interesng.
If we find out last minute, or if somebody might be...
It can delay everything.
It can delay everything and throw everything out of kilter. And just being honest, at the end of the day, a solicitor or conveyancer is acting for you. And I think communication is key between both parties.
I wondered about the first time buyer, people perhaps who haven't got much experience of buying and selling a property. Are there bits of that conveyancing journey that they might be able to take on themselves and have a go at?
I think it'd be very difficult if they need a mortgage.
Okay.
Because most lenders will insist that there is a solicitor or conveyancer involved.
Oh, right, okay.
Not necessarily in the interests of the actual client, the individual, but in the lender's interests.
It's a check that they will
because
make,
we act as a checklist, if you like, for the lender.
Of course.
And we have to satisfy certain conditions.
Yeah.
And if something did go wrong for whatever reason, then it's more than likely going to fall upon the solicitor or conveyancer's shoulders.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd compare it to is, if you had your own car and you weren't a mechanic, you wouldn't potentially look to fix your own engine.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't.
I know I would, and I wouldn't know where to start.
Yeah.
But, the fact if you try and use a solicitor or conveyancer, they are working for you. They do have insurance. If there are unforeseen circumstances, and you never know what happens in life, none of us knows what's around the corner, then you will be covered, basically.
Okay.
And there may be things that you think aren't important that a solicitor or conveyancer could point out to you, whether it be an issue with planning, building regulations, restrictive covenants, which are promises to do or not to do things on a property.
Yes.
At least we could flag that for you,
okay.
And you'd be aware of it. The customer might not want to take any notice of what you're saying.
True, and actually wouldn't, I presume in some cases, wouldn't know to look out for certain things maybe.
They wouldn't necessarily. I mean, if you purchased a property and your intention was to build an extension on the property and you did it yourself, but you didn't check the planning and you didn't check any restrictive covenants and you started building the extension and then you were told you're not allowed to do that, then that's going to impact on you financially.
Sure.
And that's why we're there, basically, to hold your hand through the process, if you like, and to guide you and to warn you, basically, of any potential dangers.
I see. So actually, yes, there are those safeguards that solicitors can bring into it. If you tried to do some of that yourself, effectively, you wouldn't be able to draw on that professional expertise in that way at those points.
Certainly,
So actually, just thinking about, again, this people perhaps who don't have much experience of it, ballpark wise, what are the costs like for this kind of work? Does it vary massively? Are there lots of different factors to it?
It can vary from region to region.
Yeah.
You normally, for example, have to do a local search with a local authority.
Okay.
The cost of that search is not uniform. Every local authority will charge a different amount. Every local authority will take different times to return that search as well.
Yeah.
There are things in certain areas, for example, in South Wales, certain parts of South Wales where there was heavy coal mining, you'd also have to do a coal mining search.
Oh, okay.
If you're buying a property in the middle of Cardiff, which isn't in the valleys, then you wouldn't be doing a coal mining search because
so
it's not relevant.
It can vary region by region.
Definitely Cornwall with tin mining searches.
Sure.
So it varies from region to region.
Okay, interesting.
And the costs, the legal fees obviously will vary. Every solicitor has to publish an indication of their fees in respect of conveyancing on their website.
Okay.
So that covers all solicitors. So that information is freely out there for people to obtain. Yeah. So as a consumer, you can obviously, like everything in life, you can shop around, you can get a number of quotes.
Yes.
And I'd recommend that you do that.
Yes.
And read the small print, if you like, as if you were buying anything else.
And do some comparison,
Do some comparisons. Yeah. There's even comparison websites out there. You can go online and have a look. Don't believe everything that you read online,
of course.
Obviously.
Yes.
But once you do, if you decide to instruct a solicitor, you will get a client care letter, and that client care letter should set out the fees, specifically set out the fees and what those charges are.
Okay, so you have that almost clarity at that point.
Clarity at the outset, and if you're not sure, And I know it's difficult because any time that you order anything these days, the tendency is just to tick the box to accept the terms and conditions because you just want to get where you want to be. Just check basically just to make sure. And if you've got a query, pick the phone up and speak to the solicitor or conveyancer and just ask them to clarify.
So that the cost element, as you say, you can almost agree that you can compare different amounts of it. Sort of generally getting information about conveyancing, if it's somebody that's even at an earlier stage and just thinking, I don't know, a year or 2 years ahead, I'd like to be, maybe buying or selling. What sources of information are out there? Are there, sources that you're aware of where you can sort of find a bit more out about what conveyancing is, what it means, how long it will take? Are there any sources like that?
Most solicitors' firms and conveyancers' firms, if you go onto their websites, they'll have a dedicated page. It's not unusual now. Most firms will have an actual guide from start to finish, which will try and break down this system that we have got and give you an ideal scenario of how it should work. But unfortunately, no two transactions are the same, and there's always something different. Life would be boring, I guess, if it was otherwise.
True.
But a solicitor's website, a conveyancer's website, the Law Society obviously have information as well. There's reams and reams of stuff on the web. If you cannot access the web for whatever reason, I would simply walk into a solicitor's office or a conveyancer's office and ask. Because there will be stuff, there will be handouts, guides, etc. that can be handed out.
Brilliant.
Just to try and explain the process, try and simplify it, although it's not simple at all.
No, I mean, that's good. At least if there's opportunity to get that information and then to start absorbing it as early as possible. That's great. So I've heard before that conveyancing or the process anyway of buying or selling a house is one of the most stressful life events that you'll experience. Have you got any tips based on the people that you've worked with and represented during that process? Have you got any tips for people in terms of how to have a smooth as possible process?
I think one thing to remember about all of this process is that it involves people. And people are different, which is a good thing. And everybody will have a different set of expectations and different requirements. I could do something for one person who would think I'm the best thing since sliced bread. I could do the same thing for the next person who thinks that it's absolutely rubbish. So everybody is different. I think communication is absolutely vital. And that works both ways, from the solicitor or conveyancer and the client side of things. Try and speak to your conveyancer or solicitor from the outset. The conveyancer or solicitor should set expectations. It is a difficult thing because there's two sides to every story.
Of course, absolutely.
It won't be just your file that the solicitor's dealing with. They will have other files for other clients as well. But anybody acting in a transaction, and this is the joy of using a solicitor or a conveyancer, there should be a set time frame agreed, if you like, to deal with things, etc. But it's communication. Communication is key, and getting the trust between the solicitor, conveyancer and the client. Because they can guide you through the process and they can make your life a lot easier. It does happen, believe me, where people ask us to slow down because we're going too fast.
Interesting.
So that can happen. Because, our aim, every client is different, but the majority want it to go through as quickly as possible. But others do ask you, slow down. I don't want to go
quite ready or haven't. There's things that they're still dealing with. Perhaps.
I think the difficulty we've got is that in the age that we live in, if you order something from Amazon, it's potentially on your doorstep the morning after, if not the same afternoon. And buying a property is a massive financial commitment.
Of course.
And the majority of people seem to think this should be like Amazon, and we should be able to see the house, point at it, buy it, and then it'd be ours the next day. But what they don't realise is the risks, if you like, that are involved. And an important one for me, which I don't think that clients necessarily understand, is that when we act on a transaction, we not only act for the client, but we also act for the lender as well. And the lender, every single lender that we have, and there's hundreds of them, they all have different requirements. So one property might be fine for one lender, but another lender might not be happy with that property. That particularly crops up with flats, with leasehold properties. one would accept a certain term of the lease.
Yes.
Another one wouldn't lend on it.
Right, yeah.
So it's very difficult to juggle what the client wants to happen,
yeah,
and what the lender wants as well.
Well, they're almost, different interests.
So we are
you're in the middle, I guess.
Solicitor conveyancer is stuck in the middle, piggy in the middle.
Yes.
So getting clients to understand that it's not just them, it's also what the lender wants as well.
Yes.
And if the lender says no, that's not our fault. It's just what they've told us to do.
Of course.
Which can be very frustrating and upsetting.
I can imagine. And so, yes, that top tip about communication becomes really important again, doesn't it? On all sides of that relationship,
Definitely.
I guess. So we mentioned there about, it's a big investment. It's for a lot of people, the single biggest transaction that they would incur, actually, isn't it, in their lives. Are there any sort of risks there with that money, sort of a deposit, for example, that you might hold on their behalf while it's sort of in transit? Are there any risks to look out for, or even scams or anything like that you think people might just have in the back of their mind to make sure that they do the right checks with who they're talking to and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest potential scam, unfortunately, is with emails.
Okay.
Because on one hand, everybody wants it to happen faster. So the typewriters have gone, the letters have gone, everything is emailed back and forth between solicitors.
Okay.
So if emails are intercepted, you could potentially get an email intercepted from a law firm, and then whoever the scammer is, if you like, would then actually email the client and say,
try to intercept
please, can you transfer your deposit monies to this account? And give, obviously, not the firm's bank details, but their account details. So we've heard of that happening a fair bit. So what I would say is most firms will not communicate with you via email to confirm bank details.
Oh, okay, right.
Even if they do send you bank details via email, which they shouldn't really do. Send £1 first of all if you are transferring money, just to test it. And then don't wait for an email back to say I've had your £1. Actually phone up and speak to somebody.
Okay.
So that you know that they have had it. I mean, that's one way. Empty properties is another one that is open to fraud. Because if somebody's left a property empty, it could have been an old tenant who's been in there, who's managed to obtain identification fraudulently, claiming to be the seller and then selling the property. Without the seller actually being aware. You wouldn't have thought somebody could actually steal a house, could you?
I know it's an educational chat. This is actually, it's incredible. The lengths that scammers can go to, actually, isn't it?
But for anybody who actually owns a property already, the Land Registry have something called Property Alert, where you can actually register, and that if anything happens with your property, you would receive an email to say that whoever has applied, whether it be a search from a local solicitor, conveyancer, whoever it is, you can see that something's happening. And if you don't know about it, you can then call the Land Registry and say, sorry, I don't know anything about this. Can you clarify what's going on? Because it could be somebody trying to potentially sell your property. It could be somebody trying to put a mortgage on the property without you knowing. So there are weird and wonderful things out there, which again reinforces the message about making use of a solicitor or conveyancer.
Because you guys can do those checks.
We do this every day. So, we can look after you basically, rather than if you did it yourself. And, potentially just handed money over, even if you're not getting a mortgage, if you just hand the money over to somebody, how do you know that's going to go through?
That additional risk, isn't
and getting it registered with the Land Registry. Because the Land Registry needs certain identification requirements complied with as well, which is certified normally by a solicitor or conveyancer.
Just on that, Wyn, with the Land Registry, are there sort of legal obligations there to update them or to interact with them during a conveyancing process?
With the Land Registry, you don't necessarily have to update them, but what I would advise, when we're talking about somebody doing something themselves, unfortunately, obviously people pass away. In a good way, people get married. So you may want to update your name. All of that can be done, and it's worth actually doing it. You don't potentially need a solicitor or conveyancer to do that for you. You could go direct to the Land Registry. But it depends. I'm sure you'll find a local solicitor or conveyancer who's more than happy to help you.
And knows
where to go and how to get it done. There's obviously a delay with the Land Registry at the moment, which I don't want to talk too much about. But they've got a massive backlog at the moment, so it is taking some applications potentially 2 years to go through. But as a member of the public, you wouldn't necessarily know about that.
Interesting. Again, it's all about this getting your head around, the length of time, the cost, all of these things. Actually, you're right. It's not something we do every day.
No.
So you wouldn't necessarily know yourself. So that's good to know that you can talk to solicitors about those kinds of things as well.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. One of the things that I find fascinating is this concept of the chain in conveyancing, and that there are multiple parties potentially, buying and selling each other's properties throughout a chain. And of course, all of the around the perimeter of it, what solicitors, lenders, estate agents, removal for, all of those kinds of things are going on in a typical chain. Have you got any tips for, I suppose, thinking about a chain that might be starting to shake at some point in it? Have you got any tips for what people can do?
First thing is, don't panic.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily take it as gospel truth. What is being said is really going on.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Communicate with your solicitor.
Yeah.
The difficulty on that one, going back to things that people don't realise, is if there was a chain of properties, normally the solicitor would only speak to the solicitor on the other side of them. They won't necessarily know what is going up, further up or further down the chain. And sometimes you can get chains of,
go on
I've seen 22 properties in a chain. With that, it's not just a responsibility to the client, I feel, and this is just a personal opinion. The conveyancer or solicitor should be communicating with the estate agent, because the estate agent can speak directly to the seller and buyer, whereas as a solicitor or conveyancer, you can only speak to your clients.
Of course.
So there has to be an element of trust there and a good relationship between the solicitor and the estate agent as well.
Sure.
And then there has to be an element of trust and a good relationship between all the different estate agents in the chain.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Because it's in everybody's interest to keep it all together, basically.
Yeah.
But again, I think unfortunately I haven't got the silver bullet, if you like, to cure it all, but it is down to communication.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do end up talking to a solicitor at the top of the chain. Sometimes you end up realising that you're at the top of the chain and you are at the bottom of the chain, which can be quite handy, because then you're getting messages from both sides faster than normal.
Of course. Yeah.
But yeah, chains can be interesting. I don't know if there is an actual solution to say,
no, perhaps not.
This is how we fix it, because when you do exchange and complete, on completion, the property has to be vacant, so there can be no, the people have to be out there going into their next one, and then the other person has to be out.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one, chains.
Yeah, I can imagine. Not for the faint-hearted, I guess, but particularly, as you say, a 20 length.
But somehow we do actually make it work as an industry. We do make it work because, there has to be a chain, because people normally, most of the time, if somebody's selling, they are moving somewhere else.
It's natural, isn't it, that there would be.
So there has to be an end to the chain somewhere.
Yes.
But we do manage to make it work. The larger the chain, obviously, the more complex it is.
Yeah.
But again, it's communication between the solicitor, the client, the estate agent, the mortgage broker, whoever's involved, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there is some sort of, if the communication, for example, breaks down at any point in that journey, or if from the perspective of the person who's buying or selling, if something's not working for them, I wondered if you have got any sort of advice for tackling problems. So if somebody, for example, is like, well, I'm not happy with this part of what's happening, or feels that something's not working in the way that they thought it would, or if just something's not worked right. Firstly, are there those kinds of things that you see occasionally happening? And secondly, what kind of approaches are there to help people resolve their concerns and things like that? I take your point that communication is central to all of that, and hopefully would remove much of that. But are there any sort of common complaints and things like that you hear in terms of conveyancing?
Communication is probably the biggest.
And when that fails.
And when it fails.
Yeah.
And the time potentially that it takes.
Okay, yeah.
The difficulty with that is, especially if you had a chain involved, for example, you could be ready, the person you're buying from could be ready, the person they're buying from could be ready, but there could be something at the top. Yeah. It could be an estate sale where they're waiting for a grant of probate. There's a backlog at the moment for probates, but you have to wait for that to come through.
Yeah.
The one thing again, and I would say again about using a solicitor or conveyancer, at the very outset you will get a client care letter.
Yeah.
In that client care letter, it will tell you basically if there are any issues. this is who you can speak to if you're not happy with the person who's dealing with it.
Yeah.
All firms now will have a complaints procedure if you need to go down that route.
Okay. Yeah.
So that can be followed as well. And that should be set out at the very outset in the initial client care letter.
Sure. Okay. So actually, yeah, that would be almost a bit of a safeguard then to say, okay, at least I know what that's going to look like in terms of the journey. And if it's not happening in the way I thought, you can then sort of contact the solicitor, I guess, and have that conversation.
And have the conversation and say you're not happy. And like anything in life, I mean, we all have to buy things from somewhere. If we're not happy, then we can raise a complaint.
Of course.
And that's what we all do. And I think, that's a society what we're all used to doing now.
Yes, exactly. That's right. And tackle problems as and when they crop up that way, don't they? Okay, that's been fantastic. And so just to summarise, I guess, so in terms of finding somebody to help you with conveyancing work, we mentioned that there's opportunities to get quotes and prices and compare and do all that piece. Sounds like there's lots of information available from all sorts of different sources in any event, and you mentioned some there, which is really helpful. The relationship with the person that's representing you, underpinned by good communication, keep talking to them. What's a good frequency for that? Is it weekly, monthly?
There is no right answer. There is absolutely no right answer.
Okay.
It all depends what is going on the transaction.
Right, okay.
What is defined as reasonable, again, because we're dealing with people, is different. I may say 7 days is reasonable. Somebody else may say, well, no, 3 days.
Okay, right.
It's down to the individual.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to manage the expectation. And that is down to the solicitor to say, well, you know what, I will contact you every 7 days, which I think is reasonable.
Even if nothing's particularly moved on.
Happening, I will update you.
Okay.
So that you know what's going on, and you provide that reassurance. That even if nothing has happened in 7 days, you'll get an email just to say, I haven't forgotten about you, but I am still waiting for this.
Okay,
And at least then you've advised the person what you are waiting for. They could potentially phone the estate agent, who could phone the seller and say, they say they're waiting for this. Can you chase it up, please? But communication is absolutely key.
It's critical to it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's a great lesson that we'll wind up with, just to say, those are the things to look out for, but also just keep talking. Not just between solicitor and client, but to all the others around the perimeter.
And I think because I think as solicitors or conveyancers, what we've got to realise is we do this every day of the week for different clients who have different requirements. And we may not worry about something, but the client may think that it's really important and it's absolutely vital when it's not.
Because they're not familiar with the process.
And if you have that conversation with them, I think we're in an age as well where, because of electronic communication and emails and everything flies back and forth really, really quickly. Sometimes it's better to pick up the phone and have a chat. Because emails are definitely misconstrued. They come across in the wrong way.
They can be. Absolutely.
But again, I mean, I can only speak from personal perspective. We try and give our clients the best service. We try and give our clients every single way that they want to communicate with us, whether it be a fax. We still use fax.
Wow.
There's people out there who still use faxes. Letters in the post, email, telephone,
carrier
WhatsApp,
pigeon.
You name it. We just try and basically give everybody whatever option they want to
which
use
is going to work
communicate
for
with
that
us
person.
is fine.
So
we try and do it, but again, not everybody will be happy because everybody's different.
Of course, absolutely. Okay, listen, Wyn, thank you so much for your time today. That's been fascinating, and hopefully that's a helpful guide for people, in terms of what conveyancing is and how to get a good result from it. Thank you.
Thank you.